Good morning, all. Once again, welcome to today's webinar, Reef Rescue Network, Coral is Calling. Our speaker today is Hayley-Jo Carr from the Reef Rescue Network. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping rules. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, and a reminder to keep your microphone muted during the session. Afterwards, there will be a Q&A session. You can add any questions that you have into the chat or raise your hand during this Q&A session, as well as an audience feedback link will be shared in the chat further to the end of this webinar. And we would really appreciate if you take the time to fill it out. So without further ado, I will now welcome our speaker to begin their presentation. Hayley?
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world listening today. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to double check everyone can see my slide and hear me well before I begin.
Yes, Hayley, we can see your slide and we can hear you.
Thank you. Okay, so my name is Hayley-Jo Carr. I'm currently the director of the Reef Rescue Network. And first of all, I'm going to give you an overview of the Perry Institute for Marine Science, and then we're going to really take a deep dive into the Reef Rescue Network. So a little bit about Perry Institute for Marine Science, for those of you not familiar. We are a non-profit committed to ensuring the health and longevity of our ocean. And we've been working for more than over 50 years, and the team has been making lasting impacts in the marine world through scientific discovery, leading edge conservation, and international collaboration. And our mission is to preserve coral reefs, coastal habitats, and vital fisheries throughout the Bahamas and the Caribbean, while working with local communities to unlock and implement sustainable solutions. So we have lots of different programs at the Perry Institute. We have ones that focus on the coral reefs and preserving coral reefs for future generations. We also have fisheries, which is creating sustainable fisheries and supporting healthy ecosystems and livelihoods. We've also doing work with coastal habitats. We're doing a lot of work with mangroves at the moment, and we are collaborating with different partners on that to research and support effective environmental policy and governance. And we also do lots of work throughout the community as well. And really all of those programs there definitely delve into community with community engagement and education. So the coral reefs is specific for my program, the Reef Rescue Network. But other coral programs and other aspects of the coral program is that we do coral assessments. So that is throughout the Bahamas and the Caribbean, and we're looking at coral reefs and looking at their status. We're also looking at things like coral diseases, and especially the prevalent stony coral tissue loss disease at the moment. And we're also engaged with treating that coral disease. And then you can see there coral restoration. And coral restoration comes under the name the Reef Rescue Network. But it's all part of the Perry Institute. And what we're doing is we're striving to preserve coral reefs for future generations through discovery science, coral reef restoration, and marine education. And our holistic approach to reef rehabilitation encompasses aerial drones, photogrammetry, and in-water field surveys, empowering us to monitor coral reef over time. And we're prioritizing areas for restoration. And like I said, we're really trying to help slow the spread of that deadly coral disease. We're always collaborating with communities throughout the Bahamas and beyond. So let's go deeper now into the Reef Rescue Network. So the Reef Rescue Network, it began officially in about 2017, and we just had a handful of nurseries at that point, and now we've developed to a network currently of just over actually, we've added another one recently. So we've actually got 51 coral nurseries, and they are based in the Bahamas and also in Aruba and St. Lucia. And these coral nurseries are really helping to upscale coral restoration efforts. So our focus is in lots of kind of small scale nurseries, but across a large area. And I'll show you the map in a minute, and we're actually spread across 14 different islands across 3 different countries. And these nurseries are really helping to rehabilitate coral reefs. We're also assisting in the recovery of critically endangered species. And also it's a partnership. This is working together with various different stakeholders, mainly dive stores, dive businesses, but also other educational facilities and NGOs, and of course our volunteers and our recreational scuba divers. And a big component of the Reef Rescue Network is its coral restoration tourism component, and I'm definitely going to talk more about that later on. So here is the map that you can see all of those partners. So we've got different partners there. We've also got all of the coral nursery locations. We are mainly focused in the Bahamas. That's where the Reef Rescue Network team are based. So because the staff are there as well, that obviously has helped us really spread throughout the archipelago. You can see we've got a good spread across all of the islands there, and we continue to kind of open up more coral nurseries on all the different islands. We've also got coral nurseries with partners that are working hard in St. Lucia and also in Aruba. And you can see there is a real mix. There's dive shops. If you're familiar with the Bahamas, you're going to recognize a lot of those names of dive shops and dive businesses. But like I said, there's also tour operators that are there. There's also other non-profits. And there's also some big high-end resorts as well. So a big variety, but the main key is the spread of these nurseries to really increase that spatial scale throughout the islands. So we are using science-based coral restoration techniques, and how we support each of those partners is we would connect with a partner when they join the Reef Rescue Network. We obviously work with them to create coral restoration goals that are unique to their location. All of our partners are extremely unique. They all offer different activities. They all have different clientele. They have different objectives of their businesses. So we make sure that it's unique to their location. We also make sure it's unique to the geographic location and the underwater environment that they have there. And all of the dive sites are different throughout the islands. So we make sure that it's unique to each location and suitable. We also then help, and with their staff, it's a full collaboration. We all work together to build and install the coral nurseries. We then grow corals within these in situ coral nurseries. In situ just means it's in the ocean. So you might have heard of coral nurseries on land, where corals can be grown in land. All of our nurseries are actually in water. They're in the open ocean. They're out the dive sites. So we grow corals in these nurseries. And then once they're large enough, we can cut pieces of coral off and outplant them onto the reefs. As you can see there, Kate, one of our coral restoration specialists, is there planting nursery reared fragments onto the reef. And then we also monitor the success of these restoration efforts as well. So let's go into those a little bit more detail. So here gives you a really nice visual of what I've just said. Basically, if you're not familiar with restoration, this is the techniques that we use. So that gives you an example of one of the styles of nurseries that we use. That's the kind of most common that we use, is the tree design. And it starts off with just really small little fragments, maybe just 5 centimeter pieces. And then those corals grow. Those corals, you can see in the picture, are absolutely huge. We have some locations where they just grow so well, and they grow really quickly. And they can be big enough within 1 year to be able to cut off a fragment and then plant that onto the reef. And then you'll see the final photo there. From just planting a few pieces, this species naturally fragments. It kind of breaks off and lodges into the substrate again and attaches itself. And it grows into these really nice, thick kind of thickets formation. And you can see the fish around there already, how important, especially this species, is to creating reef habitat. So the different nursery designs that we have, so you just saw the tree, that's definitely the most kind of common design that we have. It's a very simple design. It's, you know, very affordable. It's easy to install. And it's simply just anchored. You can't see the anchor in that picture. We use different anchors. We may use like a duckbill anchor. We use like screw anchors. If there's no sand and it's a hard substrate, then we can drill into the substrate and cement an eye bolt down. We make sure they're really fixed to that substrate. And then you have the rope coming up, and it's kind of suspended in the water column with that float at the top. And that allows that whole structure just to move within the water column. So it can just kind of move with the current. And what that means is it's really beneficial when we have things like hurricanes and storms come through. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of movement underwater during that time. And the tree just kind of sways around and moves with the water flow. Rather than being too solid and that it could break, it just allows it to kind of move. And this design has proven to uphold really well. We've had lots of hurricanes in the Bahamas, and these trees have done great. And the corals have survived really well on these trees because they're suspended, as you can see there, on some monofilament line, and they just kind of hanging on to the branch. So they're a really good structure. They're away from the rest of the reef. They're away from other predators, competitors, and they're just suspended, and corals, they're really happy just hanging there and growing. You can see then that divers are needed to keep the structure clean. You can see 2 divers there. What they're doing is cleaning algae from the PVC. What we don't want to happen is algae to grow on the PVC and then kind of down that line, because the algae could overgrow the fragment. So we do need to make sure that they're kept clean. And we also make sure that we remove any predators that do find their way onto the structures. Sometimes some coralivores like fireworms and snails may come up. We can make sure that we gently remove those. You can see there in the top picture is a line nursery. So that's another design, kind of like a washing line, if you like. So we've got the monofilament line going across, and you can have, 3, 4, 5 of those lines coming off, and they're actually joined to 2 kind of vertical lines that again just have these floats on the top. So they're also nice and flexible. They can move with the water. And those ones are great. They require kind of minimal maintenance, I would say. They don't obviously have the PVC. So you can see there that we're just cleaning the lines, cleaning the main lines, the ropes, and cleaning the fishing line that comes down towards the corals, really important. On the bottom picture there, we have a different design again. This is a new design that came in. This is like an artificial reef, we call them. This is a structure that's going to be fixed there to grow coral fragments. And these were added because they're really great for shallow water. So you can see there a couple of snorkelers have just free dived down. But these are really good for shallow water because the trees and the line nurseries, they definitely want deeper water. So you can see the height of the tree there. The tree nurseries, you want to have them in at least, 20 feet or deeper. The line nurseries are generally in anything from 40 to 50 feet. So they're in deeper water, but these domes are really beneficial for shallow water experiences. And we can just attach the corals on there. That dome down there has just been done. So you can see the coral fragments are really small. But what's going to happen is those corals are going to grow, they're going to fuse together, and those domes will end up looking like miniature little reefs. And then they can stay like that to create habitat, or we can also take cuttings from those as well that we can then plant onto the reef. So the main species that we work with currently are the acroporids here, which you can see. We've got elkhorn coral, Acropora palmata. That one, it's kind of a lot lighter color than the other 2 that you can see, kind of grows out into these big branches. And in the wild, when they get really big, it kind of forms like a massive kind of table. And they grow into massive structures, the Alcon coral. And you'll also see them in really shallow water. They love lots of wave action, and you'll see them in very, very shallow water. We also work with staghorn coral, Acropora cervicornis, in the middle there. I'd say that's the one that we're growing the most of. And you can say that's my kind of more richer orange color, but it's very kind of branchy shape. It also likes really shallow water, but it also grows really deep. I've seen wild colonies of this one growing down to about 70 feet. So that one's kind of found a lot more different depths compared to that Alcon that loves the shallow water. And then we've got the hybrid, which is when the other two cross-fertilize, which creates the fused staghorn coral, Acropora prolifera, which I think is really pretty. You can kind of see the difference there. It's a lot more kind of, we call it like more fluffier on the end, if you like, has a lot more branches, you'll see. So it is still quite branchy, but then you get lots of little branches coming off the end. That one can vary greatly on how it looks, though. It can sometimes look more like elkhorn and sometimes look more like staghorn. So that one has a huge variety of how it can look. And these are all stony corals, and they're extremely important reef building corals. And these used to be found throughout the Caribbean, so throughout the Bahamas and to the wider Caribbean. These used to dominate the reefs. And sadly, due to white band disease, pollution, overfishing, and other threats, these stony corals, as many other corals, are sadly disappearing from our reefs now. And lots of our corals are dying from various different threats. And these ones in particular are now listed as critically endangered species. So these are the ones we focused on because they are so important as reef builders. And also because of how they fragment and they grow, they're really good species to have in the nurseries because they are branching species. And because they grow pretty quick, especially the staghorn coral, we can grow that and within 12 months start to plant fragments back onto the reef. So they're a real ideal species to work within our nurseries. So when we outplant them, a lot of times I'll refer to this as like underwater gardening. It's like planting trees, taking clippings on land. It's exactly what we're doing underwater. We're taking clippings from those corals that we've grown in the nurseries. And then you can see here the divers kind of planting it onto the reef. And what we would do, what she would have already done, is clean the substrate there with a brush to clean off any algae, because we want to make sure that it's really sticks well to the reef, the epoxy. She's actually got, you can see it slightly, she's been using a 2-part marine epoxy. We also use cement and other adhesives, but we basically kind of find a crevice, clean the algae, and then use the epoxy or the cement just to kind of secure it. There's a lot of movement underwater with currents. We don't want that coral to move around. So the epoxy or the adhesive that we use is going to go hard very quickly. Usually within the hour, it's gone rock hard. And then that coral in time is actually going to grow over the epoxy or the adhesive that we've used, grow over the top of it and affix to the substrate itself. And on average, that tends to take about 3 months until we see that it's actually growing onto the reef, it's fixed there. And then it's going to continue to grow, as you can see the picture on the far right. It's going to continue to grow, make these thickets. And, when they're this size, that's when they're going to spawn as well. So we make sure that we plant, we use different genotypes within the nurseries. And why we do that, we usually keep one genotype per tree. But the reason we have lots of different genotypes is then when we plant them, we can plant the genotypes all together because obviously they're going to fuse and grow together and make these thickets. But we're going to make sure that a short distance away, there's going to be another thicket, some more corals growing, which is going to be a different genotype, so that when these corals do spawn, which happens once a year, they're going to spawn and then we can have cross-fertilization of the different genotypes. And that's going to help for more resilient corals into the future. And then obviously we want to make sure we're monitoring the outplants as well that we do. So we kind of plant in what we call like plots, like a plot area. As you can see on the right there, it's generally like a square plot. And you can see the diver there with the camera. What the diver has to do is swim back and forward across the plot, up and down. They'll be taking pictures every few seconds. That then goes into a computer program, which then can produce these photo mosaics. And they're really incredible. Like, you can just zoom in just to see, like, you know, you can go in so close to see the detail of each of these corals. And then what we can do is we can look at, well, you can see there the different, well, why they're different colors like that, because we use a program that can help identify the species of corals across a plot. And then what we can do is we can look at survivorship rates, we can look at growth rates over time, we can look at how coral reef structure is changing in time on these outplant plots. And obviously this is quite new for us because it takes many years for a plot to really kind of flourish and change and develop in time. So this is kind of ongoing, and we make sure that we always try and photo mosaic each of these plots at least once a year, so then we can keep track and see how the changes are occurring on the reef. We don't want to just do the photo mosaics, we also want to do monitoring to check how do the outplant plots change fish species, you know, a fish changing in that area, what about the substrate and the benthos, and looking how how are other corals being affected. So what we use for that is Atlantic Gulf Rapid Reef Assessments. So we use AGRA, and AGRA is great because we have assessments of a lot of these reefs, especially throughout the Bahamas. We have a history, a log, if you like, of some of these reefs from doing AGRA surveys over the years. So when we restore certain areas, we can really see the difference that it's made because we have the historical kind of data, if you like. So we use kind of AGRA moving forward, and we will be doing that a lot more into the future to see the changes to the reef ecosystem. So I popped this table in here. A lot of times people often ask, you know, what are the goals? Why are you using coral restoration? So I think this gives a nice overview of kind of the four main goals, if you like, that we have here. So we'll just have a look at these in a bit more detail. So we have the socioeconomic goals of coral restoration. So the top one there, you can see, to sustain or recover coastal protection. So coral reefs provide protection to coastal communities by stopping the wave energy, stopping the disturbances, stopping storm surge and flooding. So it's very important that we have that barrier, if you like, to protect the islands. And again, especially, you know, in the Bahamas and through the Caribbean, we want to make sure that we have that protection because, you know, storms and hurricanes are going to be increasing in the future. So very important for coastal protection. They're also really important for fisheries production. You know, most people eat fish, eat seafood. It's very important for their diet. It's a very important source of food. And, you know, it's important that we can help use restoration to sustain and reestablish these provisioning services delivered by reefs that provide habitat and nursery areas for commercially important fisheries. They're also important to sustain or enhance local tourism opportunities. So restoration can help maintain reef aesthetics to support local reef tourism. And, you know, that's a very important goal. As you saw, a lot of our partners are dive shops, our tour operators. They rely on a healthy, you know, a healthy reef that guests want to come and see, snorkel, dive, and be able to see a beautiful reef when they go out there. So it's really important to support the tourism economy. Promote local coral reef stewardship. Definitely, it's about supporting local communities or indigenous traditional owners to engage and reconnect with the local reef environment. And our coral reefs, coral nurseries, sorry, create a great opportunity to provide education to local communities about coral reefs, the threats that they face. And we do have things like lots of school groups coming out and snorkeling coral nurseries and learning about the importance of reefs and what we're doing with our restoration efforts, and to become engaged. So the next there is ecological goals. And I'd say that's the biggest, when I've asked partners, that is the main reason why they're engaged in restoration. These two here, ecological goals. They want to make sure that they can help with the diversity and the health of these degraded reef ecosystems. And they also want to assist the recovery of endangered coral populations and preserve the biodiversity. They want to see all the marine life down there. And they a lot of these dive store owners, you know, they've been operating for 30, 40 years, 50 years. And they say, you know, it's been awful seeing the degradation that's occurred on the reefs, to watch it just dying before their eyes. So they're really driven by these ecological goals to restore the reefs, but also to maintain all that incredible biodiversity that we all love on the coral reefs. The next goal there is climate change adaptation and support goals. So it's used to mitigate impacts and promote reef resilience in the face of climate change. So we want to support resistance and recovery processes to reduce risks of impact and ensure that reefs persist through current and projecting changing climate conditions. And I'll talk more about that on the next slide. And the final one there, disturbance-driven goals. You know, sadly, things happen, you know, ships do run aground. Unfortunately, anchors can be dropped and cause damage. Hurricanes can come through and cause damage. And then what restoration can do is focus on those areas, so we can go there and we can you know, stabilize fragments in the area, but also put nurseries there and then plant those corals back onto the reef. So I feel like that gives a really nice overview of the goals. So carrying on from the climate that I just mentioned there, sadly, last year we had definitely the biggest coral bleaching event that I've ever known in the Bahamas. And it had a devastating impact, not only on our coral nurseries, but also on the coral reefs. And that was also seen with our partners in St. Lucia and Aruba. The worst hit areas were definitely around New Providence and also Eleuthera, where some nurseries, you know, a whole tree may have lost all of its fragments to bleaching and it then would have died. No bleaching impacts were reported in the Abacos and Andros, though. So it was a real big variation we saw. Some places had 100% mortality, whereas others had nothing. They didn't, you know, see any of the effects in the nurseries. The corals were all looking happy and healthy. The most resilient species that we found throughout the nurseries was the Acropora prolifera, so the fused staghorn. And just in case you know, you're not familiar with bleaching, you can see the photo there. So what I mean when I'm saying like bleaching event, bleached coral, so it's because of the warming sea temperatures. So corals are very sensitive to temperature, and if the water gets too warm, then they get extremely stressed and they expel an algae known as zooxanthellae. They expel it, and that algae is extremely important for these stony corals, and they provide most of the food and the energy, to about like 90% of the food and energy that these corals need. So they're extremely important for their survival. It's a symbiotic relationship, they need them, and when they expel them, they turn white, as you can see in the picture. So you can see there's some left underneath. Why that is because they're not in the direct sunlight. So in the shading there, you'll often see there's some zooxanthellae left. But you can see they turn white. And in this picture, though, you can actually, if you look carefully, see little tiny polyps, like little tentacles coming out. That shows this coral is still alive. So, you know, it's still there. It's just feeding itself. It can grab like particles from the water, but it's in a very stressed condition. So some of our nurseries during bleaching will look like this. And then if the temperature kind of went back down and kind of settled again, then the zooxanthellae can come back in. Those nurseries that had experienced hot temperatures. We had some nurseries experience extreme temperatures from, say, August to October. Then sadly, if they're bleached for too long, what they can do is they can die. And then once they die, you won't be able to see the tentacles anymore. And these fragments will become covered in algae, and the fragment is actually died. So that's kind of what's happening during bleaching. So, often it happens quite often over the years, but when it's sustained for too long, that's when you can get kind of mass mortality, which is what occurred last year. And obviously this year as well, we've heard that we do know that we're going to be expecting another bleaching event this year. So what action are we taking for that? Obviously, it's really devastating to lose corals, both in the nurseries and in the wild. So we want to help kind of mitigate those impacts as much as possible. We do have our nurseries. We do grow corals from different locations, different islands, different nurseries. So we kind of, don't have all your eggs in one basket type thing. But what we're also creating is gene bank trees. And we found these to be very successful. So we, aside from the nursery that we would have some nurseries in a different location with the same genetic types on that tree. So we make sure we kind of save some corals, and then if they are impacted in the nursery, we still know we have them at a different location. We're also discovering thermally resilient genotypes. It is devastating to see corals die, but it's also really, you can celebrate when we're seeing corals that do survive. So, it's almost like survival is the fittest, a lot of people would say. And a lot of corals are thriving, they are doing well, they are resilient. So they're the ones that we want to kind of keep on growing. They're the ones that we're identifying. And obviously, it's really important that we get these resilient corals that are resilient to these high temperatures back onto the reefs, so that they're naturally reproducing and kind of, recovering the areas. So we're also doing site observations for both nurseries and our plant sites. So we've done a full assessment of our nurseries from last year's event, but we're still in the process of looking at our plant sites. How have they fared during bleaching? What can we learn from that? Looking at the ecological aspect of it. Why did some areas do better than others? So that we can learn moving forward the best places to outplant in the future. And we're also going to be looking at adding new species to our nurseries as well. What we're going to be looking at is our bleaching data from our other coral team, and we want to learn, okay, what species are resilient to warming sea temperatures, and then we're going to be adding some of those through microfragmentation to our in-water nurseries as well. So that's really exciting that we're going to kind of look into other species, but it's all about, like I say, looking for these thermally resilient corals that we can get back out onto the reef to restore them. So coral restoration tourism. So going back to those socio and economic goals, that's extremely important component of the Reef Rescue Network. We are very driven to increase public awareness and education about coral reefs. This is a really important part that partners say that they love when they take divers out. A lot of our reef rescue instructors, they say how great it is to teach tourists that come out diving with them about coral reefs and show them their nursery and say, look, this is what we're doing. Do you want to become engaged while you're here and help us protect our coral reefs? We help all of our partners with capacity building. So we train scuba diving instructors and snorkel guides to conduct reef rescue experiences at partner coral nurseries. And then we also help, we've just done a big Coral is Calling campaign, because we've got a really big push at the moment to try and market this and provide business support to let people know, hey, you can come to these locations, you can go to our partners, and you can actually participate in coral restoration. So I've got a quote there from the World Tourism Organization about sustainable tourism. It takes full account of its current and future economic, social, and environmental impacts, addressing the needs of visitors, the industry, the environment, and host communities. And it's kind of gone one step beyond that now to a term called regenerative tourism. So sustainable tourism is very much like, protecting the environment of the place that you visit, and regenerative is you're actually going to make it better, than it was. And how that relates to our coral nurseries is a tourist can come, they can go out with a reef rescue instructor, help maintain a nursery, and then plant a coral back onto the reef. So they've actually done something hands-on to help make a difference and help improve coral reef ecosystems on the island that they visit. So we have 5 experiences now. So we've been really excited to launch these. These were launched in November last year. And we had the Reef Rescue Diver PADI specialty. That was our core program. That's our main program, if you like, that people can partake in, and they learn to maintain a coral nursery and also plant the coral. So that's our most popular program. We've also integrated it now with sea turtle awareness and also shark conservation. So lots of people come here, go to the Bahamas to see sharks. So it kind of really was a no-brainer to just link that with coral restoration. So you can go out and do a shark dive one day and then plant a coral the next. We also realized not everyone scuba dives. We had a lot of partners that wanted to join that weren't dive shops. So that's when we created the Reef Rescue Snorkel. So you can go and snorkel a coral nursery or some of the artificial reefs, go out and snorkel a reef to learn more about the ecosystem. And then we also have the Reef Rescue Dive experience. So that could be like a one dive in a nursery, not necessarily doing a certification, but just learning about the coral nursery and doing a dive. So we've been really excited to launch all of these experiences, and some partners teach all 5, some of them focus on one, and you can look on the Reef Rescue Network website to learn more about each of these 5 experiences in detail. So here is a video from the Coral is Calling campaign. So how can you make a difference? Well, hopefully that video, and the purpose of that video is to really get you excited about getting in the water. And you can go and participate in any of the experiences that I talked about with partners throughout the Bahamas, in Aruba, St. Lucia. You can go and visit them and participate. So choose one of those. If you're not a diver yet, go and learn how to dive. And then as soon as you've done your open water course, you can straight away do the Reef Rescue Diver course immediately after. So, go out, participate, help with the nurseries, and also get to plant a coral as well. You can also become an active coral reef ambassador and spread awareness. Viewing this webinar, I should hope that you have a keen interest in protecting coral reefs. And that's really important, just spreading that knowledge, letting people know the state of coral reefs, what's happening to them, and that they too can help support efforts such as the Reef Rescue Network in trying to save our coral reefs. You can also wear our merchandise. We have this really awesome Coral is Calling merchandise that's just been created. You can see there's the hoodies, we've got t-shirts, water bottles, hats, beanies, everything that you can go on and purchase, and 100% of proceeds are reinvested into our mission. You can also donate to help fund all of our work, and that can be anything from our coral restoration activities to the educational programs. And if you would like to donate, you can scan to donate. My contact information is there. If you are, if you're watching this and you are maybe a dive shop owner or a company that's interested in joining as a partner, then feel free to email me and we can discuss that further. And, you know, if you're somebody that just wants to get involved and learn more about those experiences, then jump onto reefrescuenetwork.org and you can go on there. There is a map showing you all the locations. You can just choose one of those and contact them directly to go out and get involved. So I'd like to thank everyone for listening today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Haley. It was a wonderful presentation. So as you said, we're going to move into the Q&A portion of this webinar. As a reminder, everyone, the feedback survey is in the chat. So if you guys can fill that out, especially before you leave this webinar today, that would be awesome. And assisting Haley today with answering your questions is Will Green. Will is our coral remote sensing and photogrammetry specialist. So I'll just get started with the first question. Are you doing anything with companies like Neptune Society or others creating artificial reefs as burial grounds for human remains? Haley, I think you're muted.
Hey, I am just, I was just trying to turn my camera on, but it doesn't seem, to want to let me turn my camera on. Is that enabled, Lily?
It should be enabled, Haley. Bottom left. Do you see start video?
You'd have to, it says the host has stopped it. You'd have to allow me to share my video.
Okay.
While you look at that, I can answer that question. So companies like Neptune Society, and others creating artificial reefs as burial grounds for human remains. No, we have not done anything with companies like that. And I'm not familiar with that either. So that's definitely sounds very interesting, but it's not something I'm familiar with or that we're working with at the moment, no.
Okay, next question then. In the field, how do you differentiate one genus from another? Is there a minimum distance? I'm not sure if that's a typo. Maybe one genus from another?
Yeah, no, so in the field, yeah. No, a genus is one, you know, I was coral fragments, but that's kind of the official name is the genus from another. So is there, how do you differentiate? Yeah, how we differentiate, we collect, unfortunately, we used to be able to do genetic testing. We would send them out to get genetically tested to officially make sure that they're different genotypes, a different genus from each other, but we can no longer do that. So we currently just make sure that we collect from different locations. So a minimum distance, yeah, I would say it's at least like 10 meters on a dive site between different colonies. But we kind of tend to go beyond that in that we would collect from different sites. And a lot of these corals, you know, they look very different as well. Like you can definitely see different genotypes visually when you've been working with them for so long. You get to see all those differences. But yeah, we try to make sure that we're collecting from definitely different dive sites. So it's a big difference, a big distance, sorry, from each other.
Haley, if you want to go ahead and try your camera now, it should be working.
Yay.
Alrighty, awesome. Hi, Haley. Okay, so we're just going to move on to the next question then. So this is kind of like a three-part question. But the question is, where are you working at the moment? Florida?
Where am I?
That's just the question says, where are you working? I think they probably mean the Reef Rescue Network in general.
Yeah, so the Reef Rescue Network is based in the Bahamas, is our kind of main hub where all the team are. Our reef restoration specialists are based in the Bahamas, on different islands of the Bahamas. I'm currently located in the UK. And then we obviously have partners, like I say, in the Bahamas, Aruba, and St. Lucia.
Alrighty, and can brain coral be planted like this? How about pillar coral? Here in Belize, there's no more as far as I know.
Which corals?
They're asking brain coral and pillar corals can be planted the way y'all do it.
Yeah, pillar corals. Some people, we haven't, but I know some people in Grand Cayman, for example, have grown actually pillar coral within nurseries. Kind of grows out to the side when you hang it on the tree structures, like what I was showing you. It kind of grows out across, and then you can kind of cut it and plant it kind of vertical the way it would grow. So some people are growing them in the nurseries, but we haven't been growing them in the nurseries here in the Bahamas. Brain corals and other kind of mounding species like that, that is definitely some species that we're going to be looking into. And you would grow them in a very different way, though. We would do microfragmentation, which is kind of cutting up tiny pieces of coral, helps it helps them grow faster by cutting them up. So you would just kind of have little pieces. Often they'll be on like a puck or a round kind of substrate, and then those can sit onto the tree. And a lot of people might use tables, kind of meshes that they can use to attach these little pucks, and they'll just have little fragments of the coral. And then when they kind of fill the puck that they're sat on, that whole thing can then be planted onto the reef. There's kind of a different technique that's used for kind of brain corals than is used for the branching species that we're currently using.
Okay, understood. And are you doing any selective breeding of the more resilient species or developing or the development of new varieties?
Yeah, we're focused at the moment on definitely discovering which of those species are resilient, the most resilient. And, you know, the only thing to come out of these awful bleaching events is that we can discover these species that are more resilient, and then, like I say, make sure that they're the ones that we focus on growing. And then we can plant those species kind of in proximity so that then they will cross-fertilize and again get further resilience going forward.
Okay, next question is, are slow-growing stony corals such as brain coral also critically endangered? Does the Reef Rescue Network have an interest or capacity to expand the variety of species?
Brain corals, unless any of my team can correct me, I don't believe are critically endangered. Just the species that I mentioned, pillar coral, though, that was mentioned, is also critically endangered. I wouldn't be surprised if they're classed as endangered, but I don't believe they're critically endangered. However, what I will say is that with the recent outbreak of stony coral tissue loss disease and the recent bleaching, you know, everything is extremely stressed right now. Everything is in need of help. All coral species are in need of help. So I think the focus shouldn't be on just particular species necessarily anymore. I think we've reached that point that every species needs to be focused on. We need to be growing as many different species as we can. And then, like I say, finding out which ones are thermally resilient so that we can then focus on growing those. But yeah, coral reefs in general as an ecosystem are extremely under threat and endangered as a whole.
Okay, understood. Next question is, to plant coral reef seeds, underwater mapping is needed, which is to be able to determine coral reef cultivation zones by obtaining a digital map, namely in the form of bathymetric maps. For what underwater mapping tools are used and what method of data collection is carried out?
Well,
I'm happy to take that one. I'm not exactly sure what the question is asking entirely, but for tracking our restored sites and natural sites, we use underwater photogrammetry. Basically, that means a diver swimming with a camera and swimming in a grid over the area that we've outplanted corals to, and taking thousands of photos that then get stitched together and do a digital map. And we do that through time, and we're actually able to track individual coral colonies that we've outplanted and see whether they grow, whether they die, whether they bleach, whether they pale. Basically, whatever happens to them, we have a record and we can track them using that technology. And it also gives us a three-dimensional representation of the reef that we can use to understand the structural complexity and how that's changing in response to our outplanting efforts. So we can see how it's increasing habitat quality for fish and other species on the reef.
Okay, thank you, Will. Next question is, thank you for a great presentation. What brand of two-part epoxy do you use? I'm having trouble finding a cost-effective source.
Yeah, epoxy is very expensive. We're currently using, it's just called All Fix It. All Fix It two-part marine epoxy is what we use, but yeah, it's extremely expensive. There's a lot of people though that are in the development stages, I would say. It's kind of a watch this space. There's quite a few. I know NOAA is in process of developing an epoxy. It's just everything's being tested still at the moment, but hopefully very soon more kind of cost-effective ways will come out. One that you definitely could use that is cheaper is cement. We use just a Portland type 2 cement, and you know, it is very cheap to use. It's just a lot more messy. And you know, when you're doing things like that off dive boats with other tourists around, it's not ideal. So that's why we tend to use more epoxy, but you can use cement, and it's much more cost effective.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, considering that recurring coral bleaching events are now common and that already reduced threatened species are affected each time, what do you think should be done to maintain these species, their genetic diversity, and or avoid local extinction?
Yeah, that's a big question, isn't it? I think, you know, it's just such you know, a horrific time for coral reefs, isn't it? And there's so many threats, and you know, the main things that really need to be done, the first thing is to reduce, you know, global warming, to reduce climate change. So, you know, we need to try and stop those temperatures rising, and governments need to take it seriously to try and reduce climate change. That's kind of the biggest thing that needs to happen. The second thing that needs to happen is we need to look at, and that is what we do at the Perry Institute as well, to avoid kind of local extinction, is look at the local impacts as well. Like, what impacts are there on these reefs, such as you know, unsustainable fishing practices, pollution, unplanned coastal development. There's a lot of other threats that are happening. Those stresses need to be taken away. And then, if you like, our work can be, you know, supported, because it doesn't matter how much restoration we do if those other two components aren't also dealt with. So a lot of our work is about education. It's about working with governments to help minimize those other stresses. And if we can help kind of, you know, combat and like reduce the warming sea temperatures and climate change, we can look at those local stresses, then our work is even more vital than ever, because we are the people in doing coral restoration that are saving these species for the future. We can save them within nurseries, and also to maintain the genetic diversity and avoid that extinction happening. We've actually got a gene bank that we're going to be setting up as well with the Perry Institute for Marine Science. And these gene banks, they're kind of out of the ocean, they're in a safe space, in an aquarium. We can actually collect different genetic species and actually store them. A lot of places have been doing this already in Florida and everything. So you can store them so that, and preserve them. Some species are being frozen at the moment. You can just preserve them, and then we have time to, okay, get rid of these local stressors, and then we've got these species still that we can then grow, breed, however you want to term it, and get them back out onto the reef.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question is, what type of remote sensing equipment are you using slash have available? And then what type of remote sensing equipment do you need?
I'll take that one. That's a great question. We use a variety of different remote sensing systems. For those people who don't know, remote sensing is just the idea of studying Earth's ecosystems without touching them or interacting with them. And usually that means imagery. So I talked about underwater photogrammetry. Even that is a kind of remote sensing. So that's one thing that we use to monitor on a really, really fine scale, like 0.5 millimeter resolution, what's happening on specific patches of coral reefs. And then we also have drone systems that have specialized multispectral cameras on them that can do a better job of sort of seeing through the water column than what a traditional consumer drone might have available. And we can use that to map like live coral presence at the reef scale. And then beyond that, there's other folks that are using airborne sensors on planes, or even there's a lot of folks trying to leverage satellites for this, although it's difficult because they don't have high enough resolution to be able to see individual corals. So we're sort of more involved in the really fine scale remote sensing efforts, being underwater photogrammetry and aerial photogrammetry with a drone. But there's a lot more that can be done as well at larger scales.
Okay, thank you, Will. Okay, so this one is a kind of long. Will the program from the Reef Rescue Network have collaborations with oceanography students from around the world? Or will there be programs that can allow oceanography students to learn more in the field and better understand the problems that occur at sea and can begin to develop a program that can solve a program, sorry, that can help solve existing problems?
Collaboration with students, I don't know, Danielle, if you want to talk to our intern program. I think that one is. So if it's about collaboration with students, we do work with students, mainly though within the Bahamas, but we do have internship programs where we can work with students from other countries, I believe. I don't know if Candice or Danielle want to speak to that more about our internship program.
I think Candice would be able to speak more to that. Candice?
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. At the moment, we do have internship opportunities that students in the Bahamas typically will join us on different projects. We're also in the process at the moment of setting up collaborations with the University of the Bahamas to get more students involved. And so we actually have a University of Bahamas student right now doing their thesis project on some of the coral nursery data.
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Candice. Thank you, Haley. Thank you, Will. I don't see any more questions. So I'm just going to give one final reminder to please fill out the link that is in the chat. If you have any more questions, now is the time to drop them in the chat, but I will close the webinar right now. So thank you everyone so much for joining us today for our webinar, Reef Rescue Network Coral is Calling. For more information, please visit our website at perryinstitute.org. Follow us on our social media channels at the Perry Institute for Marine Science. This includes Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thank you again so much to Haley, and we hope you all will join us again in the future for our webinars. Thank you again so much, and please enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye,
Thank you for listening. Thank you, Will.